Hi, my name is Jess, and last week I spoke at Swinburne's AI+X Leadership Summit. The theme was lifting productivity, strengthening safety and security, and building Australia's innovation economy. Now, I only had 15 minutes, and I probably had too much information I wanted to share. So I wanted to re-record what I spoke about and provide the context that I didn't get to provide in 15 minutes. I'll also leave a link for the summit if you're interested in more information about it and what we were talking about. So before we begin, there are two things that you need to know about me. The first is that this year I have adopted a new life motto to move slow and build things. And the second is that I am building my company Paradigm Makers for the world in 2075. And I am doing this because we hear people say all the time that the systems are broken. But after 2.5 years researching the history of work, I have learned that they're not broken. They're working exactly as they were designed to. And that's the real problem. So I want to help us build new systems. And I'm doing this through a combination of experimentation, approaching the greatest challenges that we experience through a wicked problems approach, systems thinking, the design. I'm not limited to one industry, and that outside of this talk, that has been something that I found quite difficult to navigate because the way that I think and the way that I look at the world, it's not through an isolated industry. And so that's what my company reflects. My company reflects that innate curiosity that I have and desire to learn as much as I possibly can. So I want to start by showing you my company. Each of these dots that you can see on the screen represents a different element of my company. Now, it could be a mission, a value, a design principle, or even a definition, because everything that we do, particularly in the context of work, it forms part of something bigger. And one of the challenges that we have today is that we have created this approach to work where everything's very fragmented and we can't always see how what we're working on fits within the broader system that we're a part of. We can't see how that project we've been asked to do fits with the organization strategy. And we can't see where we're trying to go as an organization because we haven't clearly mapped it out. We're kind of just going day by day, hoping we're heading in the right direction. And then we get frustrated, concerned, and confused when we don't get to the outcomes that we're expecting, the outcomes that we've outlined in our strat plans. That's why I'm doing it this way. Is it going to work? I don't know yet. I just have to wait and see. But my approach to my company is to try something until it stops working. And last year, I tried to follow all of the best practice. I tried to do what I was told by successful people for how to build a successful company, and none of it was working for me. And when I flipped to looking at the world in 2075, that's when everything started to fall into place. And it's been working for almost a year now. So I'm going to keep using this approach until it stops working. But what I want to talk to you about today is about the conversation that we're having about around AI right now, because it is concerning some of the conversations that we're hearing, and it does raise a lot of alarm bells about the world that we're attempting to work towards. But I think it's important to understand that this conversation, it isn't happening in isolation. It's the result of the logic that we've inherited throughout history. So I want to take a minute to move fast because we live in a world where we're moving fast and breaking things. And I want to quickly just dive into the logic that we've inherited that got us here today to have the conversations that we're having about AI. And to start, we're going to go back to the 1400s and the Gutenberg printing press. Now, before the press, the knowledge was scarce, slow, and controlled by elites. But after, information was available everywhere. Everyone could access books, and the people in power, they tried to limit this access through censorship. In 1815, the Davy lamp was created to protect miners who were going into coal mines. Now, before the lamp, miners were experiencing a lot of danger. There were a lot of significant explosions because the lamps that they were using were mixing with the gases down the mine shafts and causing explosions. And the lamp was designed to prevent that. Now, while the explosions dropped, miners now started to experience new safety concerns because they were able to dig deeper because it felt safe to do so. And that led to suffocations due to poor ventilation. Fast forward again to 1911, and we have Frederick Taylor and his scientific management approach. Now, if I were to have a nemesis list, this man is at the top and will likely always remain at the top. Before he introduced his scientific management approach, factories were slow, inconsistent, and they relied on skilled craftspeople to produce whatever the factory was producing. But after, work sped up and workers lost their autonomy, and everything that they did became tightly controlled. They became cogs in the machine. Then we get to the 80s and 90s. Now, this photo is my first day in an office, but it also represents my mum's first day using a computer. When she went on mat leave, office work was manual and slow. But when she came back, the work pace had accelerated exponentially. We were creating these new digital industries, and this is where we got that expectation that you have to constantly be reskilling because the technology is constantly upgrading. Then we got, in 2018, Cambridge Analytica scandal. Now, before this, data was abundant, but it was unregulated. And after, data was seen as a weapon. It could be weaponized. And this created a new kind of national safety risk. The reason I wanted to share this very brief history with you is because this is the context in which we're having the conversation about AI. So when we talk about deploying AI to lift productivity, strengthen safety and security, and grow Australia's innovation economy, this is the context in which we're coming at it from. And what each of these inventions did, and each of these incidents shows us, it's that every time we were trying to solve a real problem that we had. These were legitimate problems we were experiencing. But without system redesign, these tools shaped our behavior in unexpected ways. And we're still living with the consequences of those today. I love this quote because I think it really highlights the conversations that we're having around AI. Because information and work are inseparable. Any technology that changes how we use information has the potential to reorganize how work is done. And this quote comes from a 2004 book called The New Division of Labor: How Computers Are Creating the Next Job Market. And what I particularly like about this quote is we can see the impact of this. And we can see how technology is changing how we use information and how it has the potential to reorganize how we do work. But I want you to also think about, if you were working back in 2004, how has your work changed? Have you seen any significant reorganization of how work is done? Or have you just been given tools that allowed you to increase your efficiency in how you did things? I asked my dad this question recently, and I think he paused for the longest he's ever paused when I've asked him a random question about the history of work. And he said for him, the biggest change he's noticed is how we communicate with each other. So before we had emails and WhatsApp and Slack and the thousands of other ways that we can communicate with each other, communication was a lot easier. But these tools created these new expectations around communication. We were always expected to be connected, and we expect immediate replies. We never collectively decided on these rules. It's just kind of, it became the expectation. That is how the tech changed our behavior. And we've now reached a point where every single person has different expectations around communication and the tools that they want to use to communicate, that we're overwhelmed and we struggle to keep up with all of this communication that we're expected to keep up with. And I think that's a particular legacy of the 80s and 90s computer revolution that I know Mum and I didn't expect back when that photo was taken. And I'm sure a lot of you didn't expect it either. But that's currently the reality of where we are. And I think what this quote demonstrates and what history shows us is that we tend to overestimate our tools and underestimate our systems. Whether we acknowledge it or not, each of those events that I shared with you, they were our attempts to lift productivity, strengthen safety and security, and grow an innovation economy. And I wanted to understand, well, what has that legacy given us? And how have we started to overestimate these tools and underestimate the systems? So starting with productivity, the Productivity Commission in Australia defines productivity through two different ratios. I am not a numbers person, so we're not going to get into the numbers. But essentially, the way that we measure productivity in Australia is labor equals output to hours worked. So that's why we go to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And multi-factor productivity, MFP. And this refers to the output of the combination of all inputs, including labor and capital. Now, that's confusing, but don't worry about it too much. When we think about labor growth, and this is productivity, our labor growth comes from two sources. The first is capital deepening. And this refers to this concept that more or better machines increases the output per worker. And the second is improving MFP. And this means finding new ways to combine labor and capital to increase output. Now, I don't know about you, but when I heard this definition, I thought of one man, Taylor. So that's where these definitions of productivity come from. They are the result of Taylor's scientific management approach that we still use today. They were designed for factory work where you could break each job down into individual tasks and time those tasks to see how long they would take a person to complete. That's how we continue to measure productivity today. Now, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in the 23-24 financial year, our market sector MFP, so that's new ways to combine labor and capital to increase output, was up 0.1%, and our labor productivity was up 1.1% based on the number of hours worked. Now, this rate is fairly consistent to what we've seen over at least the last decade. But we've seen a stagnation in our productivity growth in Australia. And that's one of the reasons that we are trying to use AI to lift our productivity, because that's how we measure productivity. New tools equals more productivity. But I want to contrast that with how we've seen productivity evolve throughout history. So between 1870 and 1970, we saw a 50 times increase in productivity growth. And by 2017, the average 1970s workday could be completed in 1.5 hours. So 0.1% and 1.1%, these growth rates we're not increasing our productivity. So let's have a look at safety and security. Now, generally in the context of conversations about AI, we are talking about safety and security from the perspective of cybersecurity, privacy, digital security. But I'm more interested in the human safety and security impacts. And I want to understand how where we currently are is impacting human safety and security. Now, I'm doing this and I've created my company because I had a job that left me severely anxious and depressed. And I experienced a mental health workers' compensation claim. And I don't want anyone else to experience what I did. And so that's why I find this particularly important to bring into this conversation. So let's have a look at Safe Work Australia's Key Work Health and Safety Report from 2025. This is an annual report they release where they look at the health and safety incidents that have occurred over the last year, and they look at longer term trends. So over the last 10 years, serious claims for mental health conditions has increased 161%. And we've seen about, I think it's like a 32% increase since 2017, 2018. Now, this is significantly more than any other claim category. So for physical injuries, this is significant, 161% increase. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not the numbers person, but if someone wants to take me up on an invitation, I am really curious to understand if there's any correlation between our stagnated productivity growth and this significant increase in mental health claims, workers' compensation claims, because measuring our productivity by how new tools allow us to increase our output, that to me indicates that we are still treating humans like machines, which was Taylor's intention. And we are having this negative impact on our mental health, but we don't know how to solve it. Now, I understand that when we talk about mental health, it's sometimes seen as not really relevant to the workplace. And I know there are some people out there who want the numbers. So here are the numbers. The median time lost for these claims is 35.7 weeks, which is 5 times higher than physical injuries. And the median compensation for these claims is $67,000, which is 4 times more than physical injuries. So addressing mental health and thinking about mental health in the context of AI deployment or technology or innovation or productivity, it is good for business because it costs companies a lot of money. So now let's have a look at innovation economy. Australia's research and development investment is 1.6% of our GDP compared to 2.7% of the OECD average. Now, the Global Innovation Index places us 22nd out of 139 and 21st out of 54 high-income economies. The good news for Australia is that we have really strong inputs. So we have some amazing universities and research organizations who are doing incredible work, are being very innovative. But our problem is with the outputs. We are not great at commercializing what we're creating. And I was really curious to understand why this is. And thankfully, somebody else was also curious. There was a 2021 study by Seoul National University called the Variety of National Innovation Systems. And sadly, they didn't include Australia in the data, but I think it's still relevant because it can show us what good innovation looks like and high innovation countries look like. They examined US patent data from 35 economies, and they found that high innovation countries build seamless, robust national innovation systems where every part works together to convert research investments into market value. It has also been found that high innovation countries and innovations that have this national innovation system, they started to invest in these systems back in the early 90s, whereas Australia's never really done that. It's well known that Australia has a very fragmented approach to innovation, and that's partly to blame for our weak outputs. But the thing that I found most interesting is that when we look at the types of innovations that different countries are working on, Australia tends to focus on incremental innovation, while high innovation countries are focusing on more radical innovation. So we're trying to optimize what already exists, while other countries are trying to create something that doesn't exist. And that, I think, is the reason that we aren't seeing the innovation growth that we want to see. We're too risk adverse as a country. So what can we do about this? I think the number one thing that we need to look at in the context of history is the future skills. When we think about the history and the legacy that we've inherited, those skills were all designed in the 20th century. They were designed for workplaces that were manual in factories or in workplaces before we saw the technology we have today. They weren't designed for the world that we currently live in and the complexity of our tools. We're overestimating our tools and underestimating our systems. And so that's why it's important for us to identify what the future skills are and start to focus on developing those. So every year, the World Economic Forum releases the Future Jobs Report. And obviously, AI and tech skills are near the top. But what I find equally fascinating is that we're starting to see a significant increase in human skills. So if we look at our productivity, safety, and security and innovation, I think there's a lot of these top skills that we can try to leverage as a country in Australia. So from a productivity perspective, we need to look at how we can improve value creation through analytical systems and creative skills. From a safety and security perspective, we need to reduce human and organizational risk. And we can do this through resilience, adaptability, and self-awareness. For innovation, we need to find ways to translate our ideas into tangible outcomes. And we do this through interdisciplinary, entrepreneurial, and curiosity skills. And these are skills that we can develop at any point in our life. We need to identify how we can update our teaching curriculum so our students are being taught how to be entrepreneurial. They're being taught how to take their analytical, creative, human skills and combine them with the benefits that come with technology. We don't need to ban technology. We just need to teach our young people and teach everybody how to use it in a way that benefits us instead of harms us. These four factors together, they kind of set the stage for where we are right now and the conversation we're having around AI. So I want to start thinking about, well, what can we do differently if we decide we want to have new definitions of productivity, strengthening safety and security, and innovation? How can we start to think differently? And I want to go back to this quote and focus on the second part. So any technology that changes how we use information has the potential to reorganize how work is done. Right now, it is a really exciting time, particularly to be working in technology. We have access to all the information that has come before us in the palm of our hands. If you want to know something, AI can tell you in minutes or seconds, depending on how detailed you want the explanation to be. And that's incredible. But that also gives us an incredible opportunity to actually reorganize how we work. So for Australia and building and growing our innovation economy, we shouldn't be focusing on the technology side. The value that we can add is on how we reorganize work. And that's where we should be focusing. We can be the country that identifies new ways to work so that humans thrive and so that every single person in the world belongs within these systems that exist. And that's what I'm really excited about. And I mentioned that the reason that I'm doing what I do is because of my personal experience with mental health at work. But what I've realized very quickly is that you can't just change mental health in isolation. In order to do that, you have to fix the systems. And so that's what I'm doing. And in the process, I accidentally built a tech company. It was never my intention, and it's still not my intention to build a tech company. And it's taken me a very long time to accept that that is what I have built. But the reality is what I do wouldn't be possible without AI. And my company has only existed in a world where AI exists. So I'm lucky because while a lot of you and a lot of people who live in or work in established organizations, you are dealing with a significant overload of information and you're trying to translate that into a way that works for AI. But I started with a blank page. I could do whatever I wanted. And that's what I have been doing for the last 2 years. I've been experimenting with different AI models and I've been playing and having a lot of fun doing it. And what I've realized is that organizations in the future, they need to create new systems that help to guide us in the direction that we want to go. We need to identify what's really essential and then eliminate the rest. It requires us to completely rethink everything that we think we know about work. And it requires us to be creative. Now, as a creative person who has spent the last three-ish years trying to figure out what that means to me, I have learnt that on paper or from a perspective of traditional productivity metrics, I am not productive. Yet I am more productive than I've ever been in my entire life. And it's required me to completely rethink how I work. So for us to lift productivity, strengthen safety and security, and grow Australia's innovation economy, we need to be thinking radically different to how we currently think. But in order to do that, we can't do things the way that we've always done them. It requires thinking completely differently. It means we have to embrace complexity. We have reached a point in the way that we think about work and the way that we think of the world that everything is black and white. Everything has to be simplified. But the reality is the world is complex. Everything is constantly evolving. And we're particularly seeing that in the AI space. We can't keep doing things the same way because we will end up with that dystopian world that we all dread about AI taking over. That's not the world I envision for the future. I know that we can do things differently because humans have always found new ways to use technology to make their lives better, or for certain people. But now we as a country and as a world have the opportunity to do something incredible. We can completely change how we think about work. We can ensure that we're designing work where everybody belongs. We start with concepts like regenerative inclusion. We build accessibility and sustainability into the new systems that are important to us. We look at the UN SDG goals and we identify how we can actually meaningfully make a difference. Because right now, we can't do it because our systems weren't designed for that level of complexity. Now, I can't predict the future. And if anybody tells you they can, they're probably lying to you. But what I have learned over the last 2 years is that we don't need to be able to predict the future in order to change it. What we can do is we can identify a vision for what we want the world to look like, and then we start working towards that. So I want to propose some early principles that I've been playing around with. And I really want to highlight these are work in progress because I don't know if they're going to work. All I know is that I'm trialing them now and they seem to be working for me. So I'm going to keep using them until they stop working. And I'd love to get your feedback on these. So there are 3 that I really want to highlight because if we want to use information to reorganize how work is done, that means completely rethinking how we currently think about information within our organizations. And these 3 principles are ones that I have discovered this year, and I've been thinking about how we can translate them so that they work for this context, particularly AI. So how can we use these principles that do not apply to AI and were not created for AI, but how can we apply them to the AI systems and the AI solutions that we're trying to build? Now, the first principle is a Japanese concept known as Hodo Hodo. I first came across this principle in the book Just Enough Design by Taku Satowa. And the concept of Hodo Hodo refers to deliberately holding back, fully aware of the ideal of completion. And what this does is it provides room to respond accordingly to unique sensibilities. It means that everyone that interacts with whatever it is, the product or let's say the AI model, they are allowed to bring their own contribution to it. They're able to be creative with it. They're able to use it in a context that works for them. And when we're thinking about designing new systems, what this allows us to do is build in intentional slack, ambiguity, and openness so that humans and AI can co-adapt together. Now, the second principle is also a Japanese one called shikake. And I learned about this in a book called Japanese Art of Shaping Behavior Through Design by Nahiro Matsumura. Shikake refers to anything that causes behavior that helps solve problems. So you can have good shikake or you can have bad. We obviously want good. And when we're thinking about AI and the current context that we're in the systems that we want to design, we want to be thinking about these three good shikake elements. So the first is fairness. And from our context, AI can only succeed in systems where rules are coherent, fair, and consistent. The second element is attractiveness. So we need to be identifying how we can create environments where people naturally choose the high integrity, quality actions that are designed by this system, and that these outcomes, they become effortless. So instead of trying to get people to comply with legislation or telling them what they're not allowed to do, actually design the system so that the good actions, the actions you're trying to reinforce, become the default options. It becomes harder to do the wrong thing because the system is intentionally designed to lead you in the right direction. And the third element is duality of purpose. Now, the person creating the system or the model or whatever we're looking at, and the person using it will have different goals. And it's important that we acknowledge this and that we design the systems that allow for these different goals, but are guiding us towards the same long-term capability and the same long-term North Star or mission or whatever you're using, your vision. Because ultimately that's the goal. Everyone is going to approach it from a different perspective, and everyone is going to use these systems in a different way. We just need to make sure that they're being designed in a way that is leading us towards the same ultimate outcome and ultimate goal. And the third principle, von Forster's theorem, comes from early cybernetics, so back in the 60s. And cybernetics is this principle that refers to how humans and technology work together. Now, ultimately, this theorem says that the more trivially connected the elements of the system, the less influence they will have on the system as a whole. So when we think about trivial systems, what this means is that the same input will always give you the same output. And there are times where this is appropriate. So if you're looking at assessing any application, you want to ensure that two people with the same circumstances are receiving the same outcome. But I'm more interested in the non-trivial elements and non-trivial approaches to AI. And this means that with the same input, you can get a different output. And when you think about the skills that we're going to need in the future, the human skills, this is where we can really benefit from AI, because we're combining our uniquely human skills and we're combining our lived experiences, which we all have different experiences, and we're able to come up with completely different outcomes. And that is where the real value lies. That's how we can increase our innovation and our productivity. And what this does when you're focusing on the non-trivial elements, it builds more meaningfully interconnected, more intelligent systems. And as a result, this allows AI to amplify our human intelligence and amplify what humans are doing with AI. So if we take all three of these principles that I'm proposing, Hodo Hodo will give us flexibility, Shokake will allow behavioral alignment, and von Forster's theorem will create interdependence. And this will result in a system that can adapt, guide, and think of as a whole. So I now want to go back to that diagram that I showed you right at the beginning of my company, my system that I've built. And I want to explain how I'm using this in the context of AI. So every custom GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, that I create comes from this one place. It comes from this central hub of my information. And this allows me to know that AI is working in the way that I have designed it to. It refers to the definitions that I have for concepts like innovation and productivity. And it's working through whatever the idea is that we're playing with in a way that is aligned with the company that I'm trying to build. And what I found is that this approach it's completely changed the way that I think about my work and the way that I work. So I use AI every single day for whatever I'm working on. It even helped me write this speech. But I'm not just relying on it. I don't trust the output. And the conversation that I keep having with my AI is one about why it's telling me what it's telling me and whether I can trust what it is telling me. I'm constantly challenging it because it may have access to all the information in the world, but that doesn't mean it's always right. That doesn't mean that it is always giving us the right answers or the good answers. And so it's up to us to challenge it and to ensure that it's aligning with what's important for us. And so that's how I'm using AI. I'm using it to augment my own intelligence. I'm using it to test different ideas and expand different ideas and think about the world differently in ways that we haven't really thought about it before. And it's working. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to keep going down this path until it stops working. But for right now, this has been an incredible way to integrate AI and to design my company. It's allowed me to design a new system and design a new way of working that allows my AI to succeed in whatever circumstance I'm using it. I want to leave you with three lessons, I guess. 3 ways to challenge your current thinking. And if you take nothing else away, please take these. So the first is that we expect our tools to deliver outcomes that only systems can create. So everything that we currently do is the result of intentional actions of our ancestors. We continue to see the influence of Taylorism today, even though at the time that Taylor's scientific management approach was introduced as this revolutionary and groundbreaking approach to work, the world was completely different back then. There was no computer, there was no internet, there was no smartphone, there was no AI that was being used. And I can't imagine Taylor coming back today and being glad that we're still using his approach that was specifically designed for factory work. The second is that the logic we inherited cannot deliver the future we're trying to build. We want AI to lift productivity, strengthen safety and security, and grow Australia's innovation economy. But as I showed, we haven't been able to do that so far. We're seeing stagnation with productivity and innovation growth, and we're seeing the negative impact that the way that we work is having on our mental health. So we need to be designing new systems that are designed for the world that we live in. We can't expect to hit all of the UN SDG goals and the ESGs and all of the things that we want to do to make the world better by using these outdated inherited logics. They're incompatible with that version of the world that we want to see. And the third is that system redesign is how we can make AI scalable, safe, and valuable. Now, most people, when they talk about AI, it's all about productivity and efficiency and optimization. That's not how I think about AI. To me, AI is an extension of my brain. I think a lot and I have a lot of ideas. And AI allows me to explore these ideas and test them in concepts and challenge me. And it allows me to do things that I've never been able to do before in my work. And that's just incredible. And I want everybody to be able to experience that. But until we actually redesign the systems that we work within, we can't have that relationship with AI because our systems were never designed to support AI. We need to completely rethink how we think about work. And that's what I'm really excited to be working on, and really excited to share what I'm working on with others, because I can't do this on my own. I want to bring as many people as possible around. I want to create just enough so that anyone can pick up my work and build on top of it. I don't want to be the person that revolutionized work because we all have a role to play. And my role just so happens to be in these early phases and having these ridiculous conversations about concepts that don't exist or challenging everything that we've come to believe about the world. That's what I'm really good at. And yes, it's frustrating at times, but that's the value that I can provide right now. I can help us think differently and provide a little guidance for how we can fundamentally redesign how we work, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to lift productivity, strengthen safety and security, and grow Australia's innovation economy.